Doesn't it strike you as odd that the US and Europe are suddenly dumping massive amounts of cash into an industry they completely ignored for years? Just look at this chart. 10 years ago, the US and Europe spent mere pennies on this. But today, budgets have skyrocketed almost 40-fold to $58 billion in America and $24 in Europe. How exactly did EVs snatch up 28% of the global auto market in just 10 years? And who is actually cashing in on this? Why is the highly praised Western auto industry forced to hand over up to 40% of an EV's manufacturing cost straight into the deep pockets of Asian megacorporations? And how did China ruthlessly crash the price of lithium by 80%, the exact same resource the US officially classified as a matter of national security? While Western nations were busy virtue signaling about the green transition and saving the planet, someone else was quietly, methodically, and aggressively buying up the master keys to that very transition. Today, we're talking about white oil. We're talking about lithium. In this episode, we're breaking down the most spectacular strategic blunder of the Western world. Grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Look at this graph. For almost 20 years, it's dead air, absolute flatline. A flat zero that didn't catch the eye of a single heavyweight investor in New York or London. Then, boom. Right around 2020 or 2021, the chart completely snaps and goes vertical, shooting straight into the stratosphere. Billions, tens of billions of dollars flooded into what was practically a ghost town just yesterday. So, what happened? Why did the sharpest economic minds on the planet, the wolves of Wall Street, and the leaders of the wealthiest nations suddenly start acting like their very survival depended on this white powder? The answer is terrifyingly simple. They fell asleep at the wheel. The great Western powers committed what is arguably the most colossal strategic blunder in modern history. Back then, the West's logic was dead simple. We write the killer software, and we outsource the dirty work. Why get our hands dirty? Let China build the toxic factories. We'll just buy their cheap batteries, slap them into our premium luxury cars, and rake in all the profits. It was a flawless business model, until it became their death sentence. That illusion shattered into a million pieces in just a few months when 2020 hit. The pandemic paralyzed the globe. Ports shut down. Western automakers watched in absolute horror as their assembly lines ground to a halt, one by one. The culprit? Widespread shutdowns of chemical plants in China, facilities that the boardrooms in Detroit and Munich didn't even know existed. That's when the chilling realization set in. Without Chinese supply lines, the entire mighty Western auto industry was a house of cards. Washington ran an emergency audit of its critical supply chains and had a collective panic attack. The numbers were brutal. The US controlled less than 1% of global lithium processing. Less than 1%. And for other core components, their dependence on Chinese imports was practically absolute, hovering around 90%. How did they walk blindly into this trap? The answer lies in the hard physics of the new economy. While Western powers were busy stargazing and pouring trillions of dollars into photogenic wind turbines and solar farms, they kind of forgot to address a fundamental glitch. Where do we store all this juice? Apparently, the guys in the corner offices forgot that the sun doesn't shine on demand 24/7, and the wind eventually dies down. To keep the grid alive when nature takes a break, you need massive industrial-scale mega batteries, and those are built entirely around lithium. On top of that, it doesn't matter how visually stunning or brilliantly engineered a German or American car is. Without a battery pack, it's not going anywhere. It's just an extremely expensive piece of driveway real estate. And back then, over 70% of global battery manufacturing was locked down in China. The West genuinely believed they could hack the system. They thought they could leapfrog the gritty industrial stages and jump straight into a pristine green economy. But China played the long game. Beijing understood the golden rule of the energy transition. If you want to build a clean future, you have to get your hands incredibly dirty first. And this is where things got incredibly messy. Realizing that the ship hadn't just sailed, but was already hitting top speed towards its final destination, the West hit the panic button. It got to the point where Joe Biden literally dusted off a Cold War-era law. He officially elevated lithium, cobalt, and graphite to the exact same strategic threat level as building missiles and tanks. This act gave the president the power to strong-arm resources into sectors critical to national security. Suddenly, Washington started unleashing literal helicopter money on the industry. Europe, having learned a brutal lesson about energy dependency the hard way in 2022, also went into full meltdown mode. And here comes the ultimate irony. No matter how loudly eco-activists cried while gluing themselves to the asphalt, European bureaucrats frantically started rewriting their sacred green legislation. It turns out, saving the planet is great, but when your entire economy is on life support, you grit your teeth and approve toxic strip mines and chemical plants right in your own cozy backyard. But catching up to China isn't that simple. You can't just throw a massive pile of billions at the problem and say, make it quick and pretty. Chemical metallurgy isn't snapping Legos together. It's hardcore, complex science. Beijing spent the last 2 decades training an army of chemical engineers and technologists who specialize strictly in battery materials. While Silicon Valley was busy polishing sleek startup pitch decks, China was learning how to boil raw ore in acid and hit absolute chemical purity. The West has the cash right now. They have the ambition, but they literally don't have the brains on the ground to design and calibrate these massive facilities. Total control over battery metal processing has handed China the exact same geopolitical leverage in the 21st century that the US and the Middle East enjoyed during the golden age of big oil. And it's precisely this lithium shield that empowered China to launch its massive, relentless expansion into the global auto market. An expansion that currently has European and American automakers screaming in pain. Just check out this table. A decade ago, EVs made up less than 1% of the global pie. Let that sink in. 99% of all sales were internal combustion engines. Fast forward to today, and the EV market share has smashed through the 28% mark worldwide. But here's the kicker. By the end of 2025, more than half of all electric vehicles globally belong to China. For the past 10 years, China has been cementing its absolute dominance in car sales, while legacy automakers, giants that have been around for a century, are bleeding market share at record speeds. This whole phenomenon boils down to one simple fact. Beijing was the first to wake up and smell the white oil. The ultimate cheat code behind the Chinese automotive miracle is the price tag. A Chinese EV looks sharper, drives further, and costs practically half as much as its European rival. How are they pulling this off? It's all about the hardware. The battery pack is the single most expensive piece of tech in an EV, eating up to 40% of the total manufacturing cost. And this is where a ruthless, fundamental rule applies. Whoever controls the cost of the battery controls the entire global auto market. Now look at these numbers. Here is what China's chokehold monopoly looks like across the entire production pipeline. Notice the paradox here? China physically mines just under a quarter of the world's lithium. At first glance, that doesn't sound like a lot. You'd think you could pivot and find alternative suppliers, but they hold a brutal 70% grip on the actual processing. Raw lithium dug up in Australia or Africa still ends up on a cargo ship headed straight for Chinese ports. Why? Because absolutely no one else on the planet knows how to refine it at industrial scale, with that kind of ruthless efficiency and dirt-cheap pricing. As a result, Chinese heavyweights like BYD are getting their battery packs practically at cost. They just source their refined lithium from a factory down the street in their own province. Meanwhile, Western auto giants have essentially been reduced to glorified Lego builders. If they want to roll an EV off the line, they weld the chassis, bolt in the seats, slap on the tires, and then they have to buy the true brains and brawn of the car from China. Consequently, up to 40% of the baseline cost of every single vehicle flows right back into Eastern pockets. You're probably asking the obvious question right now. Why don't Europe and the US just bite the bullet and build their own chemical refineries? Here's the reality check. Refining lithium is a spectacularly filthy, toxic, and massive energy-sucking process. You have to roast raw ore at temperatures pushing past 1,000 degrees Celsius, and then boil it in literal swimming pools of sulfuric acid. The byproduct is mountains of highly toxic waste and an absurd drain on freshwater reserves. And in Western democracies with heavy red tape and hardcore environmental pushback, taking a chemical plant or a mine from a shiny PDF pitch deck to its first commercial batch takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years. But the West's nightmare isn't just about trailing behind in chemical processing. It's a complete failure at the most basic level, buying the raw dirt. The lithium market doesn't trade like crude oil or wheat. You can't just log onto an exchange and click buy. In the mining industry, there's a thing called an offtake agreement, a contract locking in the purchase of future production. And while the West was hitting the snooze button, Chinese companies, backed by an infinite cheat code of state-sponsored credit from Beijing, rolled up to the biggest mines in Australia, Africa, and Latin America. Their pitch was simple. We will bankroll your entire operation right now. In return, we own 100% of everything you dig out of the ground for the next 10 years. Fast forward to today. When an American or German factory finally tries to source raw lithium, the mine operators just shrug and say, sorry, every rock we pull out of the dirt until 2035 already belongs to China. You simply cannot buy raw materials that are completely locked out of the open market. Furthermore, China has zero intention of just sitting back and watching American companies frantically try to jump onto a moving train. They proved exactly who runs the show in 2024 by intentionally crashing the global lithium market by 80%. The second that independent lithium mining startups started popping up across Canada, the US, and Australia, Beijing flipped a switch. They tanked the price well below the break-even point, cold-bloodedly suffocating these young projects in the crib. With this orchestrated market dump, Beijing sent a crystal-clear message to Wall Street. Don't even think about pouring capital into Western mines. The second you do, we'll tank the market again, and your billions will go up in smoke. Bottom line, we are witnessing a tectonic shift in the global economy. China didn't just win the battery metals race. They engineered an absolute bulletproof monopoly. From raw dirt extraction to cutting-edge chemical processing, they own the board. The West is currently burning through hundreds of billions of dollars, desperately trying to catch up. But you can't just magically erase a 20-year gap in tech and human capital overnight. The Western auto industry's complete dependency on Asian supply chains is no longer a risk. It's a locked-in reality for decades to come. If you got value out of this deep dive and want to understand how the global economy actually works, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Let me know down in the comments, can the West actually claw its way back to the top, or is it game over for good? Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.